Hi there, good evening everybody. Welcome to this revision webinar, which is designed to provide help and support to students for the OCR F585 pre-release case study, the Global Economy paper, which this year focuses on, amongst other things, the economics of labour migration and remittance income. This is going to be quite a short webinar presentation. We'll record it for YouTube. If you want it, when you're going through it later on again, if you want to press the pause button and take some notes down, please do that. But we'll work our way through some of the key issues here. And hopefully by the end of this session, you'll be a little bit more confident on some of the big issues that figure prominently in Extract 4. You know, taking half a step back and thinking, well, what is Extract 4 basically about? It's essentially about how lower and middle income countries, including the likes of Zambia, what can they do to attract the finance needed to sustain their growth and also their development. Oftentimes, countries such as Zambia have a savings and a foreign exchange gap. They need the investment to build their capacity and their capabilities and their competitiveness, but they can't necessarily create enough resources domestically, internally, to fund it. The main sources of finance for developing countries either come from domestic avenues, so household savings and the savings of businesses and governments, or also from the tax revenues that governments generate. I suppose that the key point really is that for most countries, those resources are just not enough these days. The infrastructure investment needs in particular are so vast that domestic resources on their own are insufficient. And as a result, countries have to turn to external sources of finance. Where can they get that money from? Well, if we were teaching this topic 25, 30 years ago, nearly all the debate would be about the economics of overseas aid, either from private donors or from government aid funding. That debate is now changing, and I think Extract 4 makes a pretty good job of showing you why that's the case. Developing countries in the past and still today, they can take out loans, often guaranteed by governments or contingent, for example, on making some economic reforms. Just today, we read that Angola, which is almost entirely dependent on oil as an export, is going to the IMF to negotiate some emergency funding for their economy. There's some thinking that Zambia could, in the next 2 or 3 years, also have to do the same. But there are some international organizations out there, IMF, the World Bank, but crucially, again, to show your contextual awareness in the exam, to really impress the examiners in 585. Perhaps mention the newly established BRIC Development Bank, or the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the AIIB. Those are worth doing a little bit of Googling, a little bit of research on, because they potentially will be very significant sources of leverage finance for all of sub-Saharan African countries in the near future. In many ways, the BRIC Development Bank and the AIIB are essentially challenger organizations to the hegemony and the established power of the World Bank and the IMF. And then crucially, of course, developing countries can try and draw in, attract some private external finance, either in the form of FDI, foreign direct investment from multinational organizations, corporations, or in the form of portfolio financial flows, money flowing into bond markets, finance flowing into stock markets and property markets and what have you. So what's the take-home point from this slide? I think it is that many lower middle-income countries can't rely on sufficient domestic resources to fund their investment. They do have to draw on external sources, and that is really the cue for Extract 4. Here is a summary of what I've just said, that essentially the 4 main flows that come into developing countries, actually it's true for all countries, but in particular for those nations, are remittances, which we're going to focus on in this session tonight, overseas development or aid, FDI, foreign direct investment, and debt and portfolio investment flows. Those are the big financial flows that come into countries. Now, figure 4.1 is an important chart in Extract 4, and it tracks, using data from the World Bank, which has, by the way, a forecast, of course, from 2014 onwards. It tracks the value in dollar terms, the total value of all of those 4 financial flows. And it's quite an important chart because it tells us some interesting things, particularly that aid has become relatively less important for many developing countries over the last 15, 20 years, and that's likely to continue. Debt and portfolio investment is, if you like, the 3rd most significant at the moment, but that is highly volatile, and we'll explain why in a second. But the key thing is to look at remittances, so that the value of remittance income. Yes, it dipped in 2009, pretty much everything dipped in 2009, but there's a long run trend increase in remittance income for many countries, and for some of them, particularly the smaller ones, it's extremely significant as a source of savings. But outweighing them all in terms of significance, in terms of relative importance, is foreign direct investment. Again, it's volatile. Look at what happened post 2008 to 2009. But since then, there's been another surge, and foreign direct investment into developing countries is now well over $700 billion, which is, in the context of remittance income, 400 billion is clearly much bigger. It's way bigger than aid. So what's the take-home point from this slide? These flows are volatile. Remittance income is the most stable of those flows, and it's now the 2nd most important. What I've done is just tidy the chart up a little bit using the actual data. It's a little bit more advanced. It just helps you to bring up to date. Nothing fundamentally has changed here, except that in 2014, the level of FDI flowing into developing countries again started to fall, albeit from a high level. So again, that reinforces that volatility. Whereas remittance income is still continuing to rise. There's also been quite a significant rise in debt and equity flows, quite a lot of money flowing into property and shares for quite a few developing countries there. Now, figure 4.2 in the extract is quite important. And again, it's good to, you have to in the exam, you have to use the data you're given to score some application marks and bring it into your answers. The left-hand side chart just basically shows the size of remittances for some pretty big countries. I mean, size isn't necessarily everything, but India has $70 billion worth of money coming in from remittances in 2014, then China, and quite a big drop to the likes of Philippines and Mexico. Now, apart from the Lebanon, these are pretty big economies in terms of size, particularly in terms of population. So this data is largely contingent on the actual size of the population. And in particular, these are countries with literally hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of people living and working overseas. We call those people the diaspora. And essentially it's another word for migrant workers who choose to live and work outside of their country of birth. The right-hand side of figure 4.2, I think, is the more significant of the two charts that you've been given there. Because what this chart shows is the significance of remittances for particular countries, 2013, so not too much difference in terms of the dates, in terms of the share of GDP. And Tajikistan, everybody's favorite holiday destination, is a staggering number that in 2013, nearly half of their GDP was contributed to by remittance income. In other words, their GNI would have been significantly higher than their GDP, nearly 50%. And all of those countries have at least 20% of GDP coming in remittances. They are clearly heavily reliant on remittances. In the same way, if you've followed my previous lecture on primary product dependence, in a similar way to the fact that Zambia is highly dependent on copper as an export. The other point about the right-hand chart, what's worthy of note, is that these are very small economies, very small economies. My instinct tells me, for example, that, I mean, Malawi's not there, but Malawi's annual GDP, similar to perhaps the Gambia, Malawi's annual GDP, $3 billion, is equivalent to Apple's profits every 10 days. So, I mean, these are very small economies, but they're highly dependent on remittance incomes. And that will be important. This is good data to use if you get a 20 marker on remittances, or if you have to comment for a 10 marker, comment on the significance of remittance income for growth and development in these countries. I'm not trying to show off here, but this is just another little chart which takes the African economies and just expresses remittance income in a slightly different way. So this is really to point out the Gambia report, of course, appears in figure 4.2, but as a share of GDP, Liberia, which has just privatized its entire education system, Lesotho, Comoros Islands, the sort of countries that do really well on Pointless, they have a very significant remittance income as a share of GDP. The other way of showing it is to say, well, what's the value of remittances as a percentage of imports? Because keep in mind that countries need to generate the money, the resources, the dollars to pay for their imports. And it's really important to understand that for countries like the Gambia and for Nigeria, over a quarter of their imports could, in theory, be funded by the money coming in from remittances. This is a seriously important point, that remittance income could, in theory, be used in following a particular chain to fund imports of capital and essential raw materials and components. Remittance incomes are stable and they are significant for many countries. The key point is whether those remittance incomes actually lead to sustainable poverty reduction and development progress. So a phrase you've probably come across a lot in the past, it depends on. Okay, it depends how those remittances are used. A little point about Zambia. Zambia figures heavily in extract 5 and in extract 3. It's going to be pretty much the main focus of your revision for the 20 marker. But Zambia doesn't appear in any of the remittance data in extract 4. So I found the data for you. This is net remittance inflows into Zambia from the thank you to the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis for the data. I think it's quite important here because actually Zambia's remittance incomes are relatively low in net terms. And they've come down actually in the last 10 years from about 0.8% of their GDP down to less than 0.2%. So for Zambia, remittance income is not particularly significant in net terms. A couple of reasons. One is that many Zambians do live and work overseas. They live and work in Dubai and Botswana and the UK, and particularly South Africa. But many of them are earning very low wages in those countries, particularly the UAE, Qatar, and therefore there's not the net money flowing back from those countries. And secondly, of course, there's a significant number of Chinese and other foreign workers working for foreign multinationals in the Zambian mining industry. And they'll be earning good money in the Zambian mining sector and sending some of that money back to China or the countries as an outflow. So for Zambia, net remittance flows are a very small percentage of their GDP. And hopefully that's useful context for what follows. One of the aspects of figure 4.1, which I think is significant for you in your revision, is the volatility of resource flows. So the extract says that remittance flows are the most stable resource flow to developing countries. That's incorrect. I mean, aid is actually more stable, as this coefficient of variation from the World Bank suggests. And you'd expect that because, for example, the UK government is committed to funding aid of 0.7% of our GNI, even if we're in a recession. Something the Daily Mail and Daily Express don't particularly like, but that's a political commitment. It's one that I support, by the way, and it's not going to be a volatile aid flow. It's going to be there. So remittances are fairly stable, but what's really important is that FDI is more volatile and debt and equity flows are even more volatile. So what's the evaluation point you could put into your essays here? If Zambia tries to attract FDI, if it tries to attract money into its emerging stock market, so it tries to borrow money, short-term money to fund investment, the big risk is that those flows coming in are highly volatile. Stock markets go up and down. Currencies go up and down. Zambian currency at the moment is particularly weak. The world economy goes through an economic cycle. Who knows how long we're off the next recession. And of course, there's all kinds of geopolitical uncertainties and instability which could affect the outflow of money, inflow of money across borders. So developing countries that rely too heavily on debt and equity flows and FDI flows are making themselves more vulnerable to economic and financial cycles. Remittances most definitely are more stable. So this leads us into a sort of comment style discussion type question on the economics of remittances. You know, to what extent, comment on the importance of remittances for developing countries. The extract is giving you some data, and that's useful, and you know, there's all kinds of stuff you can use to get some application marks there. What I want to do in just the next 2 or 3 slides, just briefly, is just think about some of the arguments for and against remittances. I'm going to assume here this is a country where there's a net inflow of remittance income, using the data, for example, from extract 4.2. One of the things that I'm really keen for you to think about is that the macroeconomic performance of a country is ultimately determined at a microeconomic level. So, you know, macroeconomics has microeconomic foundations. So one aspect of that could be to explore how remittances actually impact on individual people and families. To what extent, for example, if remittances come directly to families, does that allow them to fund a little bit more of their education and healthcare? In extract 3, we talked about the fact that mean years in school are far lower than expected years in school, that there's a big primary and secondary dropout rate. So could remittances help fund basic education, basic healthcare? Could remittances help to fund basic tools for people working in the farming sector, etc.? So that kind of microeconomic consequence can help to bring down extreme poverty, essentially drive up the really basic economic freedoms and expectations that form part of the HDI. Third point on this slide is quite important, that, as we'll come to when we look at extract 5, Zambia doesn't have a sophisticated financial system. Many millions of Zambians are exposed to very high interest rates if they need to borrow, not unlike people in the UK. And of course, remittance income could provide them with the extra income, the extra savings, which reduces their exposure to those very high interest rate debts. And fundamentally, you know, if you think about productivity and competitiveness, well, one of the limiting factors behind productivity is the fact that families don't eat properly, and malnutrition affects brain development, especially amongst the young. So if remittances can lead to better nutrition, again, there could be a macro consequence. So this slide is suggesting to you that if you get a question on remittances, go back to a very micro level and say, well, how does it affect families? And then how could that aggregate through to macroeconomic outcomes? What else can we say in terms of the benefits of remittances? Well, we know that Zambia has a very high income inequality level, a high Gini coefficient of 0.575 at latest estimates. So if remittance incomes are skewed more towards poorer families in Zambia, and that's an evaluation word to use, of course, if, it could help to reduce inequality. Hopefully it'll lead to better nutrition, which feeds through to productivity. And crucially, those remittances provide, if you like, a base level, if you like, almost like a buffer stock of savings, which Zambia can draw on if and when there's another global external shock affecting their economy. The really key point, I think, is that remittance income, which is significant for countries, can make it actually easier for governments to go to the financial markets themselves and borrow money. So Zambia has recently issued a euro bond, several billion euros worth of government debt, priced in euros. It's one of the few African countries to have done that. It's a little bit it's eased by the fact that it's got some remittance income coming through. A technical point is that remittance income actually appears as a positive item on the current account of the balance of payments. And for a lot of African countries that run significant current account deficits, they would be much worse without that inflow of remittance money coming in. So there are some macroeconomic benefits for remittance incomes, and I think hopefully this slide gives you 2 or 3 examples of what you can use there. However, again, the comment question requires you to evaluate, to make countervailing points, to twist the arguments around. What are some of the arguments against this money coming in? One argument is that a lot of the money actually goes in profits to the likes of Western Union, the money transfer businesses. I think the average commission fee on transfers coming into sub-Saharan Africa is between 9 and 12%. So a sizable slice of this money actually doesn't reach the families themselves. It goes into the pockets of multinational money transfer companies. Perhaps if Zambia invests in more mobile technology, similar to what's happened in Kenya, the rise of mobile money transfer would help to bring down the cost of sending remittances. So that could be a supply side strategy you might want to mention. Remittances do add to GNI per capita in the short run, but I suppose you could make a case for saying, well, actually, does it promote genuine sustainable growth in the long term? And the crucial evaluative point, which I'm sure many of you will use, is it depends. It depends on how much money is coming in, and it depends on how that remittance income is used. Linked, of course, to remittance incomes coming in is that people must have left the economy at some stage in the future. We'll come back to that point in a second. There's also a risk for countries like countries where Tajikistan, where remittances are nearly half of their GDP. There's a risk that big remittance inflows could cause the exchange rate to appreciate, because of course it's a net inflow of currency. So you can make a case for saying that remittance inflows could make domestic manufacturing businesses or farmers less competitive when they try and sell their products in overseas markets. The crucial point is where is this money spent? Is it used productively in productive education, in healthcare, in tooling farmers to lift their productivity? If it isn't, a lot of this remittance income just basically effectively just goes on consumption of stuff which may or may not be very useful. Final point here is that there's a kind of moral hazard issue. There are some economists, I mean, I won't name them, who think that actually there's a disincentive effect, that households who are receiving quite hefty remittance checks every month, they themselves may choose not to look actively for work. The participation rate may actually fall. That's an argument, it's a valid point to make as an evaluation argument, but I'm not sure what the evidence is for it. So I'm not sure quite how much significance to attach to that point. Anyway, hopefully from this slide, everybody, you're going to get just 2 or 3 arguments for saying, well, actually remittances on the one hand are quite beneficial, but it depends how they're used, and there could be some downsides, particularly I think the exchange rate point. The extract does make it clear, and they're giving you a nice steer here, that a lot of these developing countries, they mentioned Grenada, Dominica and Ghana, have lost a lot of skilled workers. They mentioned doctors, teachers and other skilled workers leaving the economy, and that can be quite significant. So I just want to spend finally 2 or 3 minutes thinking about why that matters. It's a classic debate in economics about the so-called brain drain effect. I mean, does it really matter for growth and development if thousands of younger skilled workers leave the economy to find work and incomes in other countries? Well, it's an interesting debate. It's one that countries are thinking about the whole time. On the one hand, from the point of view, of course, of developing countries like Zambia or like Ghana or Malawi, then they're essentially losing some expertise, some human capital from the economy. The quality of their labor force may suffer if some of their most skilled and mobile workers decide to leave. So you could think about the analysis diagrams that might be possible there. If outward migration is significant, could that cause an inward shift to the production possibility frontier? Could you use a long and aggregate supply curve diagram to show it? If the loss of human capital is significant, that could cause an inward shift to the PPF and a fall in a country's productive potential. A related argument is that many of those younger workers who have left to find their incomes and fortunes elsewhere, they could conceivably have stayed at home and maybe started businesses. And so therefore there could be a sort of slowdown in the pace of new business creation in those countries. And because they've left, then the needs of the domestic population grow, particularly as incomes rise. And so skill shortages can occur in healthcare and education and transport and the civil service, whatever. And as a result, that can actually affect human development outcomes negatively. Clearly, if enough people leave, if the depopulation effect is significant, and by the way, none of the extracts in extract 4 give you any data at all on the loss of the actual significance of the loss of workers, then there'll be a fall in economic activity generally because the population is smaller, so the market size becomes a little less, and that could make an economy less attractive to inward investment. I'm not sure how significant that point is, but it's possible. Some economists argue that the net loss of younger, skilled, dynamic people actually slows down the rate of dynamic efficiency gains, the rate of innovation in the country. And again, you could argue that's quite important for developing countries who want to develop new creative industries if they lose their best people. So clearly there are downsides from people leaving the economy. But, and again, if you're asked to comment on this, so you could be asked to comment on remittance incomes, you could be asked to comment on depopulation, so-called brain drain effects. So you're always looking for evaluation points to try and twist the arguments around and challenge the view. So here are 4 possible advantages. It's up to you whether you think these are significant or not. One, of course, is that the emigrants who leave send their remittances back. We have seen that the diaspora sends significant income flows back, and that can be important. Secondly, and this is quite, I think, potentially quite significant, that a lot of the diaspora choose to live and work overseas and stay overseas. So whenever Chinese science graduates go to America and stay, if they're allowed to stay in the United States, or they move to another country 2 or 3 years, they don't necessarily come back straight away. They may be long-term migrants. So why is that an issue? Well, of course, if they do really well, and if, for example, they are self-made people, they start businesses, they earn lots of money, potentially the diaspora could be a source of funding for the home government when it needs to raise money. You might want to Google this, but Israel, for example, issues what's called diaspora bonds. So when the Israeli government is borrowing money for research and development or for education, it can issue a diaspora bond, and wealthy Israelis around the world might be tempted to make an investment in their home economy at a competitive rate of interest. So that would be a very long-term argument in support of people leaving. And then point 3, I think, is the one that I would emphasize. And this was made by Modi when he went to the Indian Prime Minister, when he went to speak in Silicon Valley just a few weeks ago. He made a point, which I thought was quite interesting at the time. He said that he thought the thousands of Indian graduates studying at Stanford and Penn State and Yale and things, many of whom are learning how to code and learning how to grow businesses and what have you, becoming part of the startup culture. He regarded them not as a brain drain, but as a brain deposit and ultimately a brain gain. So they're living and working overseas, they're accumulating human capital, they're learning languages, learning how to code, picking up first, second degrees, what have you, gaining business experience. If they go back to India to work in the civil service or to set up startup communities, what have you, then there is that inflow of human capital which could aid and help sustain growth in the economy in the future. So I think point 2 and point 3 are actually kind of long-term benefits. So again, in terms of evaluation, make a distinction between a short-term effect and a long-term effect, and that could deepen the quality of your evaluation point. Point 4 is a pretty straightforward argument that a lot of developing countries' population growth is quite rapid, and you could make a case for saying that depopulation, some people living and working overseas, actually helps to just to subdue the natural rate of population growth, which of course can depress per capita incomes. So what I've tried to do here is just try and capture for you some of the arguments about the brain drain issue. And of course, the context has to be each individual country. And it might be worth having some examples there to think about. Interestingly, I looked at the Global Migration Report from OECD for 2013. This is not mentioned in the extract. I just think it's quite important as context that Malawi and Zambia both mentioned, and they're both, of course, in the extract. They had emigration rates of highly skilled, which were 20 times the total emigration rates. There was a very, very disproportionate outward migration of very skilled workers, partly because wages and employment opportunities are very different in different countries. So it's a significant issue for these countries. Finally, very quickly, the one thing that's not mentioned, the elephant in the room in this extract, is probably aid. So the extracts go big in extract 3 on foreign direct investment in mining. Extract 4 goes pretty large on the remittance income issues and the migration issues. Aid is kind of in the extract. It's in extract figure 4.1, as we've mentioned. Doesn't really go beyond that. So I think it'd be worth your while revising some aid economics ahead of the exam 585. People are almost forgetting that aid is still there. It's not the most important of the 4, but it's still significant for some countries. Of course, there's different types of aid. So if you're looking at this video on a revision session on our YouTube channel, it might be worth pressing the pause button and just working your way through here the different types of overseas development assistance. Bilateral aid from one country to another, project aid, which the UK government favours, all the way through to basic humanitarian relief, and also things like debt relief, cancellation of rescheduling of debts, which effectively is a form of aid. So aid is still important, particularly for some countries. And in fact, Malawi, which is in extract 1 of the 585, Malawi comes out as one of the most dependent nations for aid in the world. Zambia doesn't appear in this table. And again, that tells you a little about the 2 economies. So Zambia has an HDR ranking of 173, which well, there's only 188 countries in the list. And in 2013, net aid was nearly 1/3 of their national income. So this is really a list of countries for whom aid still represents a significant share of GNI. Notice at the bottom that the Gambia, which is highly dependent on remittances, is also highly dependent on aid. It generates barely any domestic resources of its own. I just think ahead of the exam, everybody, I'd be thinking about some of the arguments for and against aid. It's not explicitly mentioned in the extracts. That doesn't mean you shouldn't revise it for the exam. So there's all kinds of stuff you can read on this. If you go to our Tutor2 website and just type economics of aid, you'll find lots of good revision notes. How can aid promote growth and development? It can overcome the savings gap, obviously. In countries like Haiti and Nepal, it's an important source of money for post-disaster recovery and post-conflict environments. Project aid, particular project aid, can actually bring about small but important infrastructure investments, be it in transport, in the environment, in energy supply, in farming, in the agricultural sectors, in terms of things like navigation and irrigation of farms, etc. So aid can actually increase capital deepening, give more capital per worker and lift productivity. Well-targeted aid can lift human capital, improve health outcomes, etc. Paul Collier, the development economist, argues that well-targeted aid that has value for money could, in theory, add about 0.5% to the growth rate of the poorest countries. So there's a case for saying aid still has a role to play. However, and it depends how much you've spent looking at this as a student in class, there are lots of counter arguments. There are lots of people who think that aid is a force for evil, and essentially, aid is almost should be zero for African countries. in the sense that aid helps to reinforce corrupt regimes. A lot of the aid flows go straight into the hands of politicians and other ruling elites. Lots of big issues about how the money is spent and people not knowing where their pounds are going. A lot of the money gets spent on consultants whose marginal product is often zero. And aid may actually lead to a dependency culture, which actually might stunt and restrict genuine entrepreneurship. And things like humanitarian aid, food relief, actually distorting the working of markets, particularly if it causes prices to fall and damages the incentives for producers. What I would do in the exam, ahead of the exam, sorry, is just to go through some of the arguments for and against aid. These 2 slides might help. There's lots of other resources on the web, just so that you have that in the background in case the focus of the question is on remittances and FDI, yes, but actually also gets you to think about the other sources of finance for developing countries, notably government debt, private sector debt, and aid. We'll return to some of these issues in our shorter, more exam-focused sessions, which are going to be coming up in a few weeks' time. So this has been a session, a sort of half an hour look at some of the aspects of Extract 4, which kind of sets the scene for Extract 5, which is fundamentally about the Zambian economy. And our focus this time has been on the economics of remittances in particular, and the economics of migration flows, particularly outflow of workers from developing countries. Hopefully you found it useful. There's a load of resources on F585 on our website, tutor2.net/economics, constantly adding new resources each day on that. If you want to keep the conversation continuing and flowing on Twitter, please send me any questions or ideas on tutor2Geoff. I'll be really happy to engage with you on that. I hope your revision is going well. Thank you for joining me on this session. You made a great start. The exam is still some time away. And hey, let's meet up again sometime soon and look at Extract 5. So for the time being, for tonight, I'll say thank you and I'll turn off. Thank you.